The House set to hold a second vote tomorrow in its push to impeach DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, but Mayorkas remaining defiant after the first failed vote, digging in and refusing to take any blame for the disaster at our southern border. Here's what he's saying.
It certainly is a crisis, and we don't bear responsibility for a broken system, and we're doing a tremendous amount within that broken system. But fundamentally, Congress is the only one who can fix it. There is no question that we have a challenge, a crisis at the border, and there is no question that Congress needs to fix it, and we're doing everything we can within that broken system.
Stacy Washington is a talk radio host and America First Policy Institute ambassador, and she joins me now. Stacy, I'm in a positive mood this morning, so I guess it's a positive that he finally calls it a crisis, but everything else in that answer shirks blame from the Biden administration that has caused this crisis. What say you?
Well, I just would like to hear someone ask him, if it's not the president's responsibility, then why was it when President Trump was in office there were nationwide injunctions? Why weren't there congressional injunctions? Why don't we see congressional members taking responsibility for this? And why is the Biden administration fighting Texas on whether or not they can have an illegal border crossing, an actual official checkpoint in Eagle Pass, Texas? Todd, we're talking about something that has actually gone addressed the entire 3 years of his administration. He's the one who removed the Remain in Mexico. MPP is written law. It's passed. It's congressional legislation. He removed it. He removed 17 other executive orders relating to immigration on the first day. He has actually taken some part of President Trump's actual border patrol, border control activity. He's taken some part of that apart every single month he's been in office. So we're talking about 10 million new people in the country, billions of dollars, $150 billion a year annually from the states on this issue. So I don't know how he can say he doesn't have responsibility. Is he not in charge of Homeland Security? Is he not the one who's sitting there? Why did they invite him there if he has nothing to do with it? So it's a failed message. Americans understand that President Biden is the one who did this. He's the one who undertook this action. He's the one who dismantled policy that worked. He's the one who ended deportation. He's the one who's actually flying the migrants everywhere. Governor Abbott's only responsible for about 15,000 of those people moving across the country. The other millions are the responsibility of the U.S. taxpayer and President Biden, who's actually ordering them to be moved. So people see these people at the airport. Todd, there's actually a lot of viral video online. If you go look on X, if you look on Instagram, videos of people saying, why am I taking off my shoes and taking my laptop out of my bag? And other people are just strolling in here with a manila envelope. We don't even know who they are.
It makes absolutely no sense. So many great points that you articulated. And I think to your main point, the American people are seeing that. Combine that with what happened last week with regard to not just the president's age, but his ability to do the job. And I think Joe Biden is in real trouble. A new ABC News poll showing not 25, not 50, not 75, but a whopping 86% of Americans think Joe Biden is too old to serve after that damning special counsel report questioned his mental fitness. Stacey, how can he run if 86% of our fellow voters think he's too old to do the job? I don't see how he can run.
Todd, let's make this about what it's truly. The issue here isn't his age, although he is the oldest person to ever run for the presidency. This issue is actually about whether or not he's mentally competent. When that special prosecutor, said that he was too old and his memory is too bad, he actually has a bad memory, that he couldn't be prosecuted because of that. He also essentially said that he couldn't be the president of the United States, a man who controls the nuclear codes, who is the commander-in-chief of our U.S. Armed Forces, a man who decides whether or not you can come over the border illegally, a man who stood up the CBP app, a man who oversaw record inflation, double digits, a man who is currently causing me not to be able to run my gas fireplace at home in the wintertime because I don't want a $600 a month gas bill. This is the man who he also has too bad of a memory to take responsibility for 40 years of improper storage of documents, which would get any airman or seaman or naval officer time in Fort Leavenworth for the same mishap. Any person who uses classified documents and stores them in an improper way is breaking the UCMJ if you're on active duty in the military. And we've seen troops go to jail for improperly emailing something that was classified to someone who didn't have the clearance to read it. So look, this issue is not about his age, it's about his mental fitness. And I want Americans to think about this. You know, a lot of people who are in their 70s, 80s. I have a best friend who's my spiritual mentor that I study the Bible with, who is sharper than any 50-year-old I know. She is 94 years old. It's not about age, it's about fitness. President Trump shows strong mental acuity, so does Nikki Haley, so do all of the Republican candidates. This man does not. He clearly has difficulty remembering things. When I read in that report, Todd, that he actually couldn't remember if he was vice president at the time that they were discussing in the deposition, it gave me pause. It was very upsetting.
It should. It should give every American pause. And again, this isn't to jump on the man. We understand that this is the effect of age. But when you listen to his handlers in the media, they're all attacking the special counsel, Mr. Hur, saying he was cruel. No, this has nothing to do with cruelty. This has to do with making sure America is protected. Stacey, thank you. Fox and Friends right now.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.